Hello. Hello. So, I've been watching the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview. Tucker Carlson, already kind of being widely known for being a bit supportive of Russia's war in Ukraine, has apparently gone to Moscow. And in the biggest interview he's had since creating his new Tucker Carlson network, TNC, is with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. And I just got to tell you, folks, it's not what he expected. It's not what I expected. I'm like 20 or so minutes in, and I decided that I needed to record something about this because this is one of the wildest things that I've seen. Essentially, so far, this has been a very softball interview. This is a very, very softball interview that Tucker Carlson is giving Putin here. Essentially, he asked them, at the very beginning, the first question right off the bat was essentially, he said, so you said, Putin, before the war began, that you felt threatened, or as the war was beginning, that you felt threatened by the United States, and in some sense were fearing an attack from the United States, and that's part of why you did what you were doing. Which is a really softball question, because it's essentially just handing him yes, the United States was threatening us. We had to invade Ukraine. He was setting him up. And instead what Putin does is he goes and says, no, I didn't say that. And Tucker is looking at him like, what? What? It's the exact quote, of course. And essentially Putin then retorts, he goes, well, your original education was in history, right? He goes, yeah. Well, let me spend 30 seconds, a minute or so, to give you some historical context, some historical background. And folks, for the last 20 minutes, he has been talking about all of Russian history since the beginning of the Rurikid dynasty. He started in 862 with the Rurikids, the Rus Vikings coming from Scandinavia, the founding of the city of Kiev. He's been talking for 20 minutes straight about history. And it's wild to me because, folks, I'm a person who has a tendency to end up talking too much about history and droning on for a long time. And so I can tell what he's doing here. He's getting a little carried away. And Tucker, he came there to give him a softball interview, and he can't believe that he's screwing this one up. And he's sitting there looking at him in disbelief. Just watch some of this.
Kind of entertainers. I was told, no, they were not entertainers, they're Hungarians. I said, what are they doing here? What do you mean? This is their land, they live here. This was during the Soviet time in the 1980s. They preserved the Hungarian language, Hungarian names, and all their national costumes. They are Hungarians and they feel themselves to be Hungarians. And of course, when now there is an infringement.
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations are upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today, you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
He's putting the words straight into his mouth, right? It doesn't get any more softball than that.
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги, они...
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we...
It certainly does fall out of the genre of the interview. You know, this is a major, important, primetime interview. And not technically primetime as that refers to broadcast TV, but this is the equivalent of primetime, for sure. You know, this has been out for around a day, and almost 10 million people have viewed it. Look at Tucker's face. He can't believe it. He's handing him handing him the answer of how he can justify and propagandize this war to the West. It's amazing.
Going to have a serious talk or a show. You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where the Soviet Ukraine was established. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. And everything that Russia had generously bestowed on Ukraine was dragged away by the latter.
Yeah, folks. That's right. You just saw him give him the most softball question, pass him all the answers. Basically, he gave him the answers to the test, essentially. And just asked him, would you agree with that? And he goes, maybe I bored you. Just be patient. I'll get to it. And so where was I? Look, guys, I've been actually listening to what he's been saying about history, and there's a lot of it's a basic, telling of history of Russia and Ukraine, fairly run of the mill. There's some weird stuff in it. He spent a while talking about the direct lead up to World War II and the negotiate. He spent several minutes on the negotiations of Hitler attempting to get Poland to hand over the city of Danzig, or now called Gdansk, which is like a ultimatum he sent before he invaded the country. And the way he was describing it was, at least sounded to me like he was kind of a little bit critical of Poland, which is very interesting. Is that you don't really hear World War II analyzed in a anti-Polish way. He was almost painting Hitler as if, he had no choice but to, Polish just didn't give him a choice in the matter. He had to demand that city, and once they didn't hand it over, there was a certain vibe of justification that was in the way he was describing things. Very interesting.
I'm coming to a very important point of today's agenda.
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership. I do not understand what the Russian leadership was guided by at the time, but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine.
Во-первых, я думаю, что руководство России...
I don't know why I'm having trouble pausing. I'm pausing here, but here's a problem with also his historical narrative. He's described how Ukraine got its territories in the Black Sea coast and the eastern region, saying that they were transferred administratively over to Ukraine over time during a period when it was either part of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. And that's generally true. He's saying that they had no other historical connection with Ukraine, and that's not exactly true either, because those areas were first settled. Like most of those areas in eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine were pretty depopulated during the Middle Ages, and it was mostly nomadic tribes going around there, Tartars mostly, and pretty much all the cities around there were founded in the 1800s. And they were mostly settled in that time, and they were settled by a combination of Russians and Ukrainians. Russians mostly coming westward or southward, and southwestward, I suppose, and Ukrainians coming southeastward. So the problem with his analysis of this is that he's indicating that these territories were administratively given to Ukraine by Russian leaders, meaning that they legitimately have come to have these. And he doesn't seem to really be disputing that, other than the fact that other than he's mentioning that a lot of these countries, the ex-Soviet Union, especially Ukraine, have been, I guess, created out of pieces that were different countries at different times. Of course, paying no mind to the ethnic component of that aspect. The fact that it was oftentimes when ethnicity split between different countries. In the case of Ukraine, part of the Ukrainians were under Austria for a long time. Part of them were under Poland for a long time. Part of them were under Lithuania for a long time. Part of them were under Russia for a long time. So it's not that. So even just like the history he's describing is, I mean, mostly run of the mill, but it's also a very certain interpretation and take on it. And this is part of the issue with people on sort of the Russian side trying to talk about historical land. Or even, people on either side talking about what's historical land for what country. And it's pretty muddied because oftentimes when you ask, the question is this territory, especially in Eastern Europe, part of this country? Should it be part of this country or that country? Your answer is yes. Because it depends, like, it can both be true. It depends on what you're emphasizing, like what part of history you're deciding to emphasize. So,
first, I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian. Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies. All of the
I don't know if he's doing it. He's not doing himself any favors in this interview, folks. Talking about how similar and how brotherly, Ukraine and Russia were. But everyone knows that he's the man who made the decision to end that. Guys, he had an opportunity here. This is this is bad politics is what this is. I'm sorry. You're given such a huge platform from one of the foremost political influencers in the United States. He had this opportunity to convince millions of people to be at least in opposition to aiding Ukraine. He could at least convince tons of people not to support aid to Ukraine. He might even, convince people to root for Russia if he were to say the right things to the audience. He's been given a huge platform here. I personally, if I had the reach of Tucker Carlson, I would never interview Putin because I would never want to give him the platform to spread whatever he's going to lie about. But he gave him the platform. And the president of Russia, folks, has squandered it. I'm sorry. He does not understand the American public. If he thinks that the key to convincing people is to talk for 30 minutes about history. It's not it. Folks, take it from someone who does this. I'll talk for too long about history and I'll bore people. I mean, this interview is it's as if I was in this position and I just got carried away and rambled for 30 minutes.
These were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable. The second point is a very important one. I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well. The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines. Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet Union and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and association. That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole. There were smart people, including in Germany, Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should be established in Europe. Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries.
So some guy at some meeting once said that there should be some new organization, some new arrangement. And because someone said that once, you're going to feel gypped. Here's the reality. They talk, oh, why didn't they let us into NATO? Why didn't they let us into the EU? These are organizations that have standards for who they let in. You have to have a democratic country. You have to have there are certain qualifiers you have to meet. You have to meet a certain freedom of the judiciary, at least for the EU. You have to meet a certain anti-corruption standards. There's a reason, by the way, that Ukraine hasn't been admitted already officially into these organizations. Is because they don't quite pass all the standards themselves, let alone Russia. They did not pass the standards to join these organizations back then. They know this. Putin knows this. He's just being cynical about it.
Yes.
But NATO needs not to expand. That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all.
Again with this bullshit. I'm sorry, excuse my language. But somebody saying something in a meeting, NATO shouldn't expand, is not a guarantee that NATO is not going to expand. It isn't. Like, some guy said something.
He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. In fact, he got angry once. If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again. Everything happened just as he had said.
Well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point. And many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, that the opposite happened. But you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia do you think convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
Interesting question, I think.
West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States.
Tucker Carlson's shocked. Because he's passing him. Nice little underhanded throw. And he can't catch it.
United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves.
Somebody said something. Again, someone said something in both of these two things he's talking about here. There were no guarantees. Someone said something in a meeting once. And to them, it's a guarantee.
Waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are market economy and there's no communist party power. Let's negotiate.
No, we are as bourgeois as you are now. Dude, what? Okay, I think what's clear, what I've really learned about in this interview, this guy doesn't understand how the West or how Western society works. He thinks that some guy telling him something at the meeting is a guarantee. Because you know why? Because he's used to mafia style negotiations. He doesn't even get it. He literally doesn't even understand. And Tucker's realizing this. And that's why he's giving this look. And that he's off in his fantasy world, or at least often is mind in a history book. And look, I love history. I talk about history. I like history, all that stuff. I think about history a lot. But this is bizarre stuff. It's a little unhinged, honestly.
Moreover, I have also said this publicly before. There was a moment when a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise? As soon as the developments in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there. I do.
Complex process? Dude, what? Dude, he's doing himself no favors. No favors at all here. He's talking about, please, ladies, let us into NATO, let us into the West, listen. He was saying, let us in. And then of course, we were backing the Serbs and Milosevic. Well, why? They were doing that, but why is he bringing that up as if that's something that goes in his favor? And then he goes, I know there were complex processes going on there. You mean genocide? And not to single out the Serbs, by the way, just exclusively. Now, the worst of the genocide was committed by the Serbs there. There were also genocidal acts, or at least large-scale massacres committed by Croats and Bosnians against... There are massacres on all sides, perpetrated against all sides. But it's well documented. The worst of the genocide that happened over there was done by the Serbs under Milosevic. Why is he bringing this up as like a favorable example? It's really surprising to me. I'm actually really shocked here.
But Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism. of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing.
Ну хорошо.
He understood everything, I assure you. Well,
Думаю, ладно, все.
I became president in 2000.
Yeah, I think that, I think he understood what was going on, Yeltsin. But Yeltsin was definitely an alcoholic. But besides the point, though, he's arguing that international law essentially stopped being respected and really stopped mattering when the U.S. bombed Belgrade. There. I don't know about that one, Chief. It was to take down the Milosevic government, which was committing active genocide. I don't know that event would have been the one to eliminate the influence of international. It's a weird argument. It's a weird argument.
I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you sincere?
It's impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was...
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
If he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened, if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay, fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive. I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your point of view?
Interesting question.
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere. Why we received such a negative response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on. And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO. I will give you another example now concerning Ukraine. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote, even if they do not like something. Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret.
He's implying that the reason they couldn't get in, not because of anything else, is just because Russia is too big and powerful in their own right, and it would threaten the U.S.'s ability to control and manipulate the puppet strings of all the other European countries. That's basically what he's trying to say.
Secret to you, say anything new. Nevertheless, after that we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq. We were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus.
Но все равно продолжали это делать.
But they continued to do it anyway. And political support, information support, financial support, even military support came from the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus. I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, "It's impossible. Do you have proof?" I said, "Yes." I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof. He looked at it, and you know what he said? "I apologize, but that's what happened." I'll quote. He says, "Well, I'm gonna kick their ass." We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply. I said to the FSB director, "Write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President?" He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply. We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, "We have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it." Just ridiculous. Well, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. You're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your
That's a
government.
cool story.
Ну, конечно, имелось в виду в данном
Of
случае.
course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus.
Они их называли.
That's who they called the opposition.
Это вот второй момент.
This is the second
Очень
point.
важный.
First Chechen War, first
The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the US missile defense system was created.
Начало.
The beginning.
И мы долго уговаривали.
We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States.
Меня пригласили в
Moreover,
отец Буша младшего.
after was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean,
Там состоялась очень серьезная беседа,
I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team.
чтобы
I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that we believe,
которая, как мы считаем,
if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran.
угроз со
That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system. I suggested working together, Russia, the United States, and Europe. They said it was very interesting. They asked me, "Are you serious?" I said, "Absolutely."
Я говорю, представь.
Let me ask, what year was this?
Ну, я не помню. Вот
I don't remember.
в интернете, когда я был.
It is easy to find out on the internet when I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr. It is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about.
Мне сказали, это очень интересно.
I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together. The world will change. We'll probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world. He says yes, and asks, "Are you serious?" I said, "Of course. We need to think about it," I'm told.
Вот в этот кабинет.
I said, "Go ahead, please." Then Secretary of Defense Gates, for
So essentially, he feels threatened by, or he felt threatened by the defensive U.S. missile system. Like, oh, you can't have your own defensive missile system. That's a threat to us. That's a threat. It's interesting. That's interesting how a defensive missile system can threaten you. And instead he's saying, well, why don't we all have one where we all have our own missile system together? Are you serious? They ask him. Because of course, like, what the hell what are you talking about? We're enemies, like, or at least we have been historically. What do you mean we're going to have a missile system or we're going to have a missile defense shield where we're going to have our enemies on the inside of the shield with us? What? Like the main people who you're like literally trying to be shielded from is going to be within the shield with you? Fascinating theory. I mean, wow.
Former director of CIA and Secretary of State Rice came in here, in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side. They said to me, yes, we have thought about it. We agree. I said, thank God, great, but with some exceptions.
So twice you've described U.S. presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who are elected, in your telling.
Именно так.
That's right. That's right. In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the details because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential conversation. But our proposal was declined. That's a fact. It was right then when I said, look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures. We will create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems. The answer was, we are not doing this against you, and you do what you want, assuming that it is not against us, not against the United States. I said, okay. Very well. That's...
I think I understand now. And I think I understood from the I understood from the very beginning, but I wasn't entirely sure whether that was the case or not, whether that was what he meant. The reason he's saying that the missile defense system is a threat to him is because it breaks the compact of mutually assured destruction. He's threatened by the fact that they have a missile defense system, even if that's not meant to strike Russia. The fact that they can't strike us, the fact that they can't blow us up with nuclear missiles is a threat. And he's saying, well, in order for us to be safe, we're going to have to design even better missiles that'll get through your missile defense system, which hence probably was the idea behind the Kinjal missiles, which unfortunately for them seem to be shot down by Patriot systems more often than not. But still, he sees him not being able to destroy Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York by a click of a button. He sees that as a threat. It's really backwards, and Machiavellian thinking. And honestly, you know what? I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. I might go dive into some other parts of this video in a little bit. It's getting late, and I just figured I'd show you guys a little bit of what this is. And notice it's still him talking about history. 40 minutes into the video. And Tucker's asking these questions, throwing him these softballs. He's slapping them away and saying, no, hold on, be patient. Let me get back to where was I? Let me get back to where I was. The next thing, and let's get to the creation of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Yeah. Bizarre interview. And Tucker's face says it all.